My name's Sandra Campbell, by the way, if you weren't here in the morning. And I teach in a variety of locations, various universities. This week I was in Charlottetown at a palliative care conference teaching doctors and nurses and social workers about communication. I've done a variety of teaching kinds of things, but elder abuse and the relationship between elder abuse and ageism are a very important pillar, really, in my career. And I really have decided that I'm going to focus largely on ageism for the rest of my career because I think it's a problem. So I'm going to talk about underlying factors, personal, family, and society. We talked already about background information. Now I'm going to get more into the detail. I'm going to try to collect the dots and talk about what each of us can do about it. So personal factors. There are lots of personal factors that go into the creation of an environment that's rich for elder abuse. And these are a few. And these relate not only to the abuser, but also often to the person being abused. Disadvantage is a very important aspect. People who are poor, people who are unemployed, who are addicted, and have other disadvantages, these are the people who are often victims or abusers themselves. Isolation is a big factor, and some of the speakers have spoken about isolation and the need to get out and stay connected. And this organization here that you're part of, and this festival, is one way to avoid isolation. Illness and frailty. Well, we've talked quite a bit about illness and frailty, but it does make you a little vulnerable. And as you get older, sometimes you feel vulnerable for a variety of reasons. You may know that your body is just not quite as strong as it was, or you may feel the difference in power between you and another person. And these are things that can make you feel vulnerable. Stress. Anybody in this room have stress in their life? Lots of you do, yes, me too. But stress affects elder abuse. And lack of knowledge. And lack of knowledge is, I think, a very significant factor because lots of us don't understand aging, we don't understand elder abuse, we don't understand even what is okay and what is not okay. And but I think the underlying lack of knowledge about aging is probably the most important thing, both for the older person being abused, but also for the abuser. Imagine trying to look after someone and they're starting to argue with you or to have difficulty doing something they've always done well. You don't recognize that it's a part of the illness or the health problem that they have. You're just expected to provide the care. Well, it's hard to do that when you don't understand where it's coming from. So it's an important thing. And then there's relationship issues. The whole concept of trust, being able to trust the people that we're living with, people that are providing care, people that work in institutions, and our family members. Trust, in my field, which is social work, trust is the essence of what is the base of a good relationship. If there's no trust, there's really nothing. And so it's extremely important. Caregiving, people have talked about the multiple demands and the concerns and the stressors, how there's not enough support, how we feel stressed and overwhelmed, lack of knowledge again, and expectations within the relationship. We have to remember when we think about the caregiving relationships, this daughter or son is often the caregiver of the parent. And people talk, about a role reversal. I don't like that phrase because to me, even if the older person is having very significant problems with their brain, they're still the one that you ran to when you were a child. And so the parent is still the parent. And the child is still the child, even if they're 60, right? So it's not so easy to suddenly be providing care to someone who cared for you. And it's also not easy to be cared for by someone you used to care for. So there's lots of issues around that. And, you know, the literature in the old days, when that article about the sandwich generation was first written, the literature at that time blamed caregivers for elder abuse, almost exclusively, saying it was caregiver burnout. Well, it is sometimes, but there are tens of thousands of people providing excellent care with no sign of abuse. It's much deeper and much more complicated than that. That is an involvement in some instances, but certainly not all. Then there's society's elements. We've talked about the 90 days respite, which is a great thing to have available. And I've used that with my own family members. And that to me is kind of an outstanding piece. But then we've also talked today about the cost of various kinds of care, of what it costs for a day of caregiving, and so on. So those two things don't always balance out. You know, you can get respite care, but for some reason you can't get care for one day that you may need. You can get some things, but not everything. What ended up being the stimuli that my mother, that my family had, and that my mother needed and decided to move into a long-term care facility based on, was because we could not get spur-of-the-moment help when we got up in the morning and she had a bad day and needed help, and I had a meeting at 9 o'clock that I couldn't get out of. You know, I had to go to work, but she needed care, but there was nobody that could come in at the last minute like that. Simple thing like that can result in the movement to a long-term care facility, the lack of the service. We have lots of people making decisions. So we have substitute decision makers, capacity assessors, power of attorneys. We've talked about those. And those are all very necessary in some instances. But let's remember whose decision we're talking about here. This is about the older person and the older person's rights. And when we talk about power of attorney, capacity assessors, and substitute decision makers, let's be real clear what we're talking about. We're talking about taking away the power of someone to make their own decisions. And we have to take that very seriously. We need more focus on the older person themselves. We've talked about healthcare costs. Sometimes the debates about euthanasia and assisted suicide make me really, really nervous, because we've got people getting older, we've got people talking about the cost of care, we've got people talking about euthanasia. And I'll just leave it at that, but it worries me. So where does long-term care fit in? Well, yes, there is abuse in long-term care facilities. Not too often, and sometimes it's hard to deal with because you need to prove that it's happening. But it is there. And if people are cognitively impaired, if they're incapable, if they've been defined as incapable, tested and been proven to be incapable, then, and when they're in an institution, then we do need to report where we see abuse. And older people themselves and family members can call a hotline. Each long-term care facility is obligated to have the phone number posted for the hotline. You can call and get some help. But there's not enough money in these facilities, not nearly. There's not enough staff. Not nearly. And, you know, when someone calls in sick, which is a very common phenomena in the homes, somebody else has to pick up the slack. They're usually working short-staffed. Most of the workers are part-time workers. Most of the part-time workers have 2 or 3 jobs. So in order to make an adequate income, many of them are single moms. You know, there's a thing that I've been quoted as saying in the newspapers and speeches and so on. It's easier, quicker, and cheaper to push someone in a wheelchair to the dining room than it is to walk beside them, offering your arm as support and making sure they're safe. And it's easier, quicker, and cheaper to feed someone than it is to cue them to feed themselves. And so when we're told that we have to cut costs, this is some of the ways that it happens. And we're also perhaps creating a situation where abuse is going to be more likely. Other abused groups in our society, children, and then mostly women, but partners, spousal partners, are in some ways similar to older adults in that the abuse has been discussed only as those people were beginning to gain their rightful place in society. So it wasn't until children were starting to be felt to be powerless that we started to identify child abuse. And it wasn't until women were identified as disadvantaged that we started to talk about spousal abuse. And now I like to see it as a sign of hope that we are now starting to recognize that older adults are also marginalized, and so now we're talking about elder abuse. So let's hope that we're going in a very positive direction. Older people are marginalized, and elder abuse has been hidden, but it's beginning to be noticed. So what is old age? Is it sometimes a slide into a loss of status? It should be a time when we can finally use our wisdom to leave the world a better place when we leave. I mean, when you think about your life, do you not know more now than you did 10 years ago, 20 years ago? So we should be sharing what we know and not allowing people to say, well, you're just old, you don't understand. Yeah. We do understand.
This is our job, I think, because why the new generation, they don't know where they are going. And you guys and we know so many things that we have to tell them, we have to prepare them, because they are in a mess.
Yeah, I agree. So we need to take our rightful place. If we focus on helping people live longer independently, to be less disabled, to have better diets, and to have more activity in their lives, this is what the United Nations work on older adults has recommended. If we did this, health costs would be less. It's well known. And if we let older adults be more independent, health costs will be less. But we need the health services when we need them. So we have to be smarter about all of this. Ageism is based in deeply held society beliefs. In families, so often I've heard people say, well, I had to put mom in a nursing home. Well, what is this word put all about? Why is it not that the mother got to decide or got to have some say in what was going on? Ageist, that's an ageist attitude. In government policies, we medicalize everything about aging. We don't allow older people to have social programs that will help them. And there was a study done many years ago that said that older people go to the doctors because they're lonely. Well, this is a pretty expensive, friendly visitor, right? Wouldn't it be better to have a friendly visitor program? But we medicalize it. It's expensive when you medicalize stuff. In organizations, what about the organizations you interact with? Do they always treat you with respect? In the workplace, we have a phenomenon that's been identified by one researcher as retirement by unemployment. Many, many people are underemployed after they hit 50. And I'm sure you know some of those. Why is that? Well, I would argue that it's ageist attitudes. We argue that older people aren't going to train themselves to upgrade their skills. It's actually not true. The employers don't always offer older people the chance to upgrade their skills. So it's not just about older people not taking them up on it. And there are stereotypical beliefs about many things, even in the professions, even in social work. I've been working with older adults since 1978, and I can't tell you how many people I have had say to me, well, they're old, they're not going to change. Well, that is wrong. That is so wrong. But it's like a judgment of me that I can't be a really good social worker unless I work with younger people. And that's true with many professions. I've heard lots of professionals say that. So, is it about power? Well, it just happens that power is the subject of what my PhD was all about. So that's where I'm headed. So some of the sources of power are these. And these won't be a surprise to you. Knowledge and science and money and titles and politics and life itself. And gender and age and race and class. These are all sources of power or disempowerment. Is it about respect? Perhaps we don't respect our elders in our families. And I just realized I am missing a prop, and I'm not going to go to my briefcase to get it. So I'm going to ask you to use your imagination. Okay, I talked about putting older people in institutions. Now, what about when you go to the grocery store and you're in line at the checkout and there's a long line and you're at the back of the row? And I say this often when I'm working with audiences of all ages. And at the front of the row, there's an older woman who has her change purse, and she's looking in her change purse, right? And she's picking out her change and putting it on the counter, right? But then I look at the faces in the line behind me, the line in front of me, and I see these looks of hurry up, right? This is ageism. What I want to say to these people, that woman is trying to help the cashier by getting accurate change so that she doesn't have to break yet another bill. That's the first thing. The second thing is the older woman may have a lack of sensitivity in her fingertips because it's something that happens when you get older. Your fingers are less sensitive. And so we have this ageist response. We don't respect our older people in government policies all the time. We demand that people shovel snow, that the sidewalks be shoveled by a certain time in many communities. In Waterloo, where I lived, you had to have your sidewalk shoveled by noon hour. But you can't always get help to shovel your sidewalks, and not every older person is able to shovel their sidewalks. Home care hours are available, but in order to get home care, you have to need help with a bath. Think about the implications of that. I'll let your imagination take you there. I already talked about the food budgets and staffing in long-term care. So it is cheaper, yes, but is this the system that is adequate for us? Is this what we want for us and for our parents and for our children? In Canada, if we could develop a new respect is what it's about, for our older people, we might decide to put more dollars into our services. And if we do that, abuse will decline, because I believe that abuse happens because we do not respect our older people. And unfortunately, we pass that lack of respect on to our children and on to their children, and the abuse cycle continues. So we have to change the rules here. We have to change the message and respect older people and teach other people to respect older people. So I agree with what you said about telling the stories. We need to tell the stories to the younger generation about who we are and what we've learned and how we've learned it. Because not all lessons are obsolete in spite of electronics and in spite of texting and in spite of all these razzle-dazzle implements we have. Those tools are great, but they don't teach us how to raise children, how to relate to someone in the opposite sex, how to deal with broken relationships. These are the things that old people understand. They're experts in living. This is why I've always worked with old people. So, if we do this, we will have the kind of society that we want to live in, where elders are honored and respected. We need to think about our society's attitudes, but we also need to think about the status and rights of older people. We need to think of the contributions that older people make to the societies in which we live, and about the cost to society of not respecting older people, and about the benefit to society of respecting them. Older people have voting power. We have a political voice. And in fact, older people vote way more often than younger people. And by younger people, I mean in their early 20s. So don't forget to vote. And then there's about connecting the dots. So if we develop a new collective and individual respect for older people, we would talk with our parent, or more importantly, we would listen. Listening is very important when we approach a difficult decision. Institutionalization, for example. Talk about it. Talk about it. Talk to your children. Talk to your siblings. It needs to be talked about. We would care enough to support a government that pays for enough excellent staff to provide care in home care, care in long-term care. Not custodial care, real care. We would provide snow shoveling, perhaps, just as an example. We would install benches along the sidewalks occasionally. And Toronto is kind of unique in this area. Toronto has better services than many other communities. But we all need to have benches along our pathways so that we can sit down from time to time. And I think we would actually wait more patiently in line in the supermarket. Things would be very different. If we had more respect, we'd have less marginalization. We'd demand better. We'd have less abuse, better care, and fuller lives. And I'm for all that. So what about you? What can you do? What about you in your life? Do you respect all the older people around you? And even if you consider yourself older yourself, and I know some of you have gray hair, as do I, it's important to think about your respect for other older people. Do you tell or listen without comment to ageist jokes? Or do you comment and say, well, I don't like that joke, or not about age, as I said before? Do you focus on retaining your youth? Now, when I do presentations to the middle-aged group, and some of you are middle-aged and some of you are a little older, well, I always say middle age is from the age of 7 to 75, okay? So I tell my students that because it allows me to be in their category and to make a point that I want to make. But do you focus on retaining your youth? You know, it was quite a step forward for me when I stopped dyeing my hair. People, as I said this morning, people related to me differently, and it wasn't always good. And it was a little scary. And there's been times I've debated about going back to my other color, but I have been known to put a stripe of purple in it from time to time. I didn't do that today, but I thought about it. So growing old, as Senator Carstairs said one time, and I'm paraphrasing what she said, but it should be a goal, an achievement, not a problem. To get old is a wonderful thing. It should be a wonderful thing. It should be something you're proud of. So we can watch for our ageist attitudes, call attention to ageism when we see it, and educate people about the true value of wisdom that is held by the oldest among us. Specific strategies for individuals. We need supportive services for caregivers, regardless of age. We need counseling. We need education programs. We need family intervention services, skilled older workers that are providing a meaningful role. I don't mean a token role, I mean a meaningful role. We need multidisciplinary teamwork. We need enough workers. We need to pay for skilled workers. We need to teach anti-ageist work habits in institutions. We need anti-ageist training on a public level, like the anti-smoking training. We need to provide dollars for programs such as these for older people and their families, regardless of the setting. Older people are experts in living. It's time that the younger generations realize what they're missing. Seniors, capable adults, should have all the rights and privileges accorded to all functioning adults, to take risks, to do our problem solving, our own problem solving, and to live life to the fullest. Thank you.